At 6:30 in the morning on June 6, 1944, a steel ramp dropped into the gray water off the Normandy coast. The sound it made was swallowed instantly by the noise of everything else. The men inside had been on the water for 3 hours. Their uniforms were soaked through. Some had been sick over the sides. Some had been sick on each other. They were carrying between 60 and 90 pounds of equipment, and the water below the ramp was chest deep and cold. The man to the left went down before he cleared the ramp. The man to the right made it 4 steps before the same thing happened. The beach ahead was 300 yards of open ground with no cover and no margin for hesitation. They had been told the bombers would clear the beach. They had been told the tanks would lead the way. They had been told the naval guns would silence the German positions before the first man stepped ashore. None of those things had happened. The bombers had released late, dropping their payloads miles inland. The tanks were sitting at the bottom of the English Channel. The guns had stopped firing too early, afraid of hitting their own men. What remained was the beach. And the beach was exactly what the German engineers had built it to be. A killing ground with no exits and no mercy. The obstacles were still standing. The wire was still intact. The concrete gun emplacements above looked down on 300 yards of wet sand and waited. The beach had a name. It was called Omaha. 2 years of planning had led to this moment. Thousands of generals, engineers, and intelligence officers had spent those years trying to make what was about to happen survivable. They had not entirely succeeded. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The operation had a name that told you nothing about what it actually was. Operation Overlord. It sounded like a bureaucratic filing system. What it actually was the largest amphibious invasion in the history of human warfare, and the men who designed it knew that if it failed, there would be no second attempt. The war in Europe would continue for years, perhaps forever. Planning had begun in earnest in 1943 under a staff-designated Cossack, a name so aggressively bland it seemed designed to hide the scale of what was being attempted. When Dwight Eisenhower was appointed Supreme Commander in December of that year, he inherited a plan already 18 months in the making. He also inherited its problems. The target window was narrow. Tides, moonlight, and weather all had to align within the same 24-hour period. There were only a handful of such windows each month. Miss one and wait 3 weeks for the next. The original date had been June 5th. A storm made that impossible. Eisenhower delayed 1 day, knowing that a second delay would push the operation into late June and potentially compromise everything that had already been set in motion. On the night of June 5th, he sat alone and wrote a message accepting full personal responsibility for the failure of the invasion. He folded it and put it in his breast pocket. He did not throw it away. He kept it close because he was not certain he would not need it. The numbers behind his decision were staggering. 156,000 troops, 11,000 aircraft, nearly 7,000 naval vessels, 5 beaches stretching across 50 miles of French coastline. Years of industrial output, intelligence gathering, and human preparation compressed into a single morning tide. All of it now depended on what the next few hours produced. Before the first soldier ever stepped onto a beach, the Allies had already been fighting a different kind of war. One with no guns, no bombs, no beaches, just lies told carefully over a very long time. The Germans knew an invasion was coming. Everyone knew. The question was where. The French coastline stretches for hundreds of miles, and the Wehrmacht could not defend all of it equally. They had to guess. The Allies needed them to guess wrong. So the Allies built a fiction. They invented an entire army. They called it the First United States Army Group, and it existed only on paper, in fake radio signals, in carefully planted rumors, and in the imagination of German intelligence officers who desperately wanted to believe it was real. They needed a commander for this imaginary army, someone so famous and so feared that the Germans would never question his presence. They chose George Patton. Hitler believed, with complete conviction, that no serious invasion would ever happen without Patton leading it. As long as Patton appeared to be elsewhere, Normandy could not be the real target. Then there was the man the Germans knew only by his reports. His code name was Garbo. His real name was Juan Pujol Garcia, a Spaniard who hated fascism so deeply that he had built his own fictional spy network from scratch, feeding Berlin a steady stream of invented intelligence for years. His sources did not exist. His reports were theater, and German high command trusted him completely. On the morning of June 6th, when the landing craft were already crossing the channel, Hitler's panzer divisions sat still, held in reserve, waiting for the real invasion that Garbo had promised was still coming. The beach was real. The army that could have stopped it was not there. The plan did not survive the morning. The paratroopers who were supposed to secure the flanks and clear the roads inland had dropped in darkness the night before. They were supposed to land in tight formation on marked zones. Instead, anti-aircraft fire and clouds and navigation errors scattered them across 25 miles of Normandy countryside. Men landed in flooded fields and drowned under the weight of their own equipment. Entire units reassembled with strangers, officers they had never met, men from different divisions who spoke different unit languages and carried different objectives. The carefully rehearsed plan was gone before dawn. The bombers came next. 329 B-24s tasked with destroying the German fortifications above Omaha Beach. They arrived on time. They dropped their payloads. Every single bomb missed. Fearful of hitting the approaching landing craft, the crews had delayed their release by 30 seconds. 30 seconds at bombing speed meant the explosions landed 3 miles inland, in empty French fields, killing no Germans and destroying nothing that mattered. Then the tanks. The DD Shermans, fitted with canvas flotation screens, were supposed to wade ashore ahead of the infantry and provide cover. The seas off Omaha were running 4 to 5 feet. The screens were never designed for that. 27 of 29 tanks sank within minutes of launch. Their crews went down with them. When the ramps dropped and the first wave of infantry hit the beach, they found the wire intact, the obstacles untouched, and the German gunners in their concrete positions completely unharmed and fully awake. Men died before their boots found sand. Units landed in the wrong sectors. Officers were gone in the first seconds. The seawall offered the only cover, and it led nowhere. Eisenhower was on a ship miles offshore. There was nothing he could do. There was nothing anyone could do now but the men on the sand. And then, something happened that no plan had anticipated because no plan could have. Small groups of men began to move. Not because they were ordered to. Not because a general had radioed instructions from a ship offshore. But because the alternative was to stay on the sand and die there. And some men, when given only terrible choices, choose the one that moves forward. Sergeant after sergeant, in sectors up and down the beach, made the same decision independently, without coordination, without communication, without any reasonable expectation of survival. They found the draws, the natural gullies cutting up through the bluffs, and they started climbing. Brigadier General Norman Cota walked upright along the seawall, while everything around him was aimed at killing standing men. He had no tactical reason to survive the morning. He survived anyway. He looked at the men pinned against the wall and told them there were 2 kinds of people staying on the beach. The message was understood. Then the destroyers came. Their captains had orders keeping them at safe distance from the shoreline. The captains looked at the beach and made a different calculation. They brought their ships to within 800 yards of the sand, close enough to risk grounding on the sandbars, close enough to see individual men. They opened direct fire on the German positions from point-blank range by naval standards. It was not in the plan. It worked. Hitler's panzers still had not moved. Garbo's fiction was still holding. The reserve divisions that could have pushed the Allies back into the water sat in formation, waiting for the real invasion that was never going to come. By nightfall, 156,000 men were ashore. The beachhead existed. The thing that was supposed to be impossible had been done. And the men who did it had done it by abandoning the plan entirely and replacing it with something no document could ever contain. That evening, Eisenhower reached into his breast pocket and took out the letter he had written the night before. The one that began with the words, "Our landings have failed." He read it. Then he folded it again and put it away. He would not throw it away for weeks, as though he could not quite believe it had not been needed. The final count of the dead from June 6 alone was approximately 4,414 Allied soldiers. The total number of casualties, including the wounded and the missing, was somewhere between 10,000 and 12,000 by the time the sun went down. The Atlantic Wall, which Hitler had described as impregnable, which had taken years and the forced labor of hundreds of thousands to construct, had been breached in a single tide cycle on a Tuesday morning. Paris fell 80 days later. Germany surrendered 337 days after that. The war in Europe, which had consumed the continent for 5 years, ended because a plan that failed was executed by men who refused to. The history books record D-Day as a triumph of Allied planning and logistical genius. That is not wrong. The planning mattered. The logistics mattered. The deception mattered. None of it was sufficient. The bombers missed. The tanks sank. The paratroopers scattered. Every layer of preparation that was supposed to make the landing survivable failed before noon. What the history books record less often is the simpler truth underneath all of it. That the largest military operation ever attempted succeeded because, at the moment the plan stopped working, the men responsible for carrying it out decided to keep going anyway. Planning creates the conditions for courage. It has never been a substitute for it. The ramp dropped at 6:30 in the morning. By nightfall, the war had changed, not because everything went right, because enough men walked forward when it didn't. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.